She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She pulled her fist back and drove it, hard, deliberate, calculated, straight into the stomach of a 10-year-old boy, a child, on a commercial flight in front of 200 witnesses. The impact was sickening. The boy crumpled, his headphones hit the floor, and for 3 full seconds, nobody moved, because nobody could believe what their eyes had just told them was real. That flight attendant had just punched a black child in the stomach like he was nothing, like he was no one, and she straightened her jacket and she smiled. Within 10 minutes, an entire airport would shut down. This is that story. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notifications so you never miss a story. And before we dive in, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning, because what happened on that plane is something none of us should ever forget. The morning of October 14th started the way most Tuesday mornings start at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Loud, crowded, smelling like coffee and anxiety and jet fuel. Thousands of people moving in 100 different directions, rolling suitcases over polished floors, talking too loud into phones, arguing over overhead bins before they even boarded. It was the kind of place where nobody really noticed anybody else. That was the problem. And that was also the thing that almost let what happened stay hidden. Tanya White had been awake since 4 in the morning, not because she had an early flight. She wasn't going anywhere. She was standing at gate C-14, watching her son walk toward the jetway, and every single part of her wanted to call him back. Zachary was 10 years old, but people always thought he was older. He was tall for his age, broad in the shoulders, with his father's serious eyes and her stubborn chin. He carried a dark blue backpack with a cartoon rocket ship on the front. She'd bought it for him 2 Christmases ago, and he'd refused to give it up, even though his classmates teased him for it. He said rockets were cool. She'd told him he was right. Zach, she grabbed his arm one last time before the gate agent gestured for him to move forward. You remember everything I told you? Yes, Mom. Say it back to me. He sighed the way only a 10-year-old can sigh, like the weight of being told to repeat something was physically painful. Stay in my seat. Keep my seatbelt on when the light is on. Don't talk to strangers unless I need help. And if anyone makes me feel unsafe, I tell the nearest adult in charge and I ask for their name. He paused. And I call you the second we land. She straightened the collar of his hoodie. It was dark green. She'd remember that color for the rest of her life. That's my boy. Mom? He looked around to see if anyone was watching. You're embarrassing me. Good, she kissed his forehead. Now go. Text me when you're seated. She watched him walk down that jetway with his little rocket ship backpack bouncing on his shoulders, and she felt something she couldn't name. Not fear exactly, something heavier than fear, something that sat in the pit of her stomach like a stone. She told herself she was being paranoid. It was a 2-hour flight to Charlotte. His father would be waiting at the other end. Everything would be fine. She was wrong. Zachary had never flown alone before. He'd flown with his mother twice. Once to visit his grandmother in Memphis when he was 6, once to Florida for a school trip in 3rd grade. Both times, Tanya had been right there in the seat next to him, handing him ginger ale for the turbulence and letting him have the window. This time, he was in a middle seat in row 17, seat B. He'd checked his boarding pass 4 times to make sure he had the right row. He found his seat without trouble, tucked his backpack under the seat in front of him the way his mother had taught him, and pulled out his headphones. He had a playlist. His dad had sent him a playlist of songs they both liked, mostly older stuff, some Stevie Wonder, a little bit of old-school hip-hop that his dad pretended wasn't inappropriate for a 10-year-old. Zachary had memorized every word of every song on it. He pressed play before the plane even started boarding fully, and he let the music settle around him like a second skin. The woman in the window seat, a heavy-set woman in her 60s with silver reading glasses pushed up on her head, smiled at him when she sat down. Traveling alone, sweetheart? Yes, ma'am. He remembered what his mother said about manners. Going to see my dad. That's wonderful. She patted his arm once, briefly, the way older women do when they're not trying to be intrusive. First time alone? Yes, ma'am. You're doing great. She opened her novel and went quiet. He appreciated that. The seat on his other side, the aisle seat, remained empty until almost the last minute of boarding. Then a man dropped into it. Late 30s, business casual, laptop bag, already looking irritated about something that had nothing to do with Zachary. He didn't make eye contact. He put in his own earbuds and started scrolling through his phone. Zachary didn't mind. He was perfectly happy in his own world. That was when the first thing happened. The flight attendants were moving through the aisle doing their pre-flight checks, and the service cart came through slowly, methodically, the way it always does on a full flight. Zachary had leaned forward slightly to adjust something in his backpack. Just for a second, just a small shift, and the edge of the cart caught the top of his head. Not hard, not even close to hard. It barely grazed him. But it surprised him, and he jerked back automatically, the way anyone does when something unexpected touches their head, and that involuntary movement knocked his elbow into the armrest, which made a small thump. "Hey!" The voice was sharp, not loud, but sharp, the kind of voice designed to make a person feel immediately small. Zachary looked up. Carla Stevens was standing over him. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair pulled back tight, uniform pressed, name tag glinting under the cabin lights. Her expression was not the expression of someone who had bumped a child with a cart by accident. It was the expression of someone who had decided, in the half-second between the bump and the correction, that the child was the problem. "Watch what you're doing," she said. Zachary blinked. "I'm sorry, the cart hit my—" "I said, watch what you're doing." Her voice didn't rise. It stayed exactly where it was, which was somehow worse than yelling. "Keep your arms in your seat." "He didn't do anything," the woman at the window said, looking up from her book. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "The cart bumped him." Carla didn't even look at her. She looked at Zachary for one more beat, a look he would describe later, struggling for the right words, as the look someone gives you when they've already decided they don't like you. And then she moved on down the aisle. Zachary sat very still. His heart was going a little fast. He pressed his headphones tighter against his ears and told himself it was fine. It was nothing. His mom had told him that sometimes people were having bad days, and it wasn't about him. He pulled that thought around him like a blanket and tried to let the music do its work. But the music wasn't quite as loud as it had been before. Robert Grant was in seat 22A, window, left side of the plane, 11 rows behind Zachary. He was 53 years old, retired Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and he'd been back in civilian life for 8 years now. He drove a gray pickup truck. He had a daughter in college and a wife who made the best sweet potato pie he'd ever tasted in his life. He was flying to Charlotte for a job interview, a consulting firm, private sector, his first real shot at something that felt like a future. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He was also not a man who walked away from it when it found someone who couldn't defend themselves. He hadn't seen the first exchange with Zachary. He'd been looking out the window, watching the ground crew work the tarmac. But he would see what came next. The safety demonstration happened, the plane taxied, the engines built to their familiar roar. Zachary gripped his armrest the way he always did during takeoff, not because he was scared exactly, but because the sound always hit him in the chest like a second heartbeat. The wheels left the ground, the city fell away beneath them. He exhaled. He waited until the seatbelt sign clicked off. And then he did what any 10-year-old on a 2-hour flight would do. He reached into the seat pocket in front of him and pulled out the in-flight magazine, even though it was mostly advertisements. He shifted in his seat. He crossed his legs. He uncrossed them. He was not being loud. He was not talking. He was simply being 10 years old and occupying the small space that 10-year-olds occupy when they are expected to sit still for 2 hours in a seat designed for a full-grown adult. Carla came back through with drinks. She stopped at row 17. She handed a small cup of ginger ale to the woman at the window without comment. She handed a cup of water to the man on the aisle without comment. She looked at Zachary. "What do you want?" He looked up. Ginger ale, please." She stared at him for a second too long. Then she poured a half cup, not the full cup she'd given the woman, and set it down on his tray table without another word. Moved on. The man on the aisle side pulled out one of his earbuds and looked at Zachary. Not unkindly, just observing. He looked at the half cup. He looked at the full cup the woman at the window had. He looked back at Zachary. Zachary shrugged the way kids do when they're trying to play something off. The man put his earbud back in. 30 minutes into the flight, Zachary had to use the bathroom. He waited. He wasn't sure why he waited. Maybe because he didn't want to deal with Carla again. Maybe because he was self-conscious about climbing over the man on the aisle who was clearly deep into something on his laptop. But eventually, biology won the argument, and he tapped the man's arm gently. "Excuse me, I need to get out." The man pulled out his earbud, looked at him, nodded, and stood up without a word, stepping back to let Zachary out. Simple. No issue. Zachary walked to the back of the plane, found the tiny bathroom available, used it, washed his hands, and started back. He was being careful. He was watching where he put his feet. He was doing exactly what his mother had told him to do. And then the plane hit a patch of air turbulence. Not severe, not even close to the kind of thing that makes the pilot come on the intercom. Just the ordinary brief choppiness that every flight has. The kind that makes your body sway slightly left or right before you catch yourself. It made Zachary's shoulder brush against Carla, who was standing in the aisle near row 20, talking to another passenger. It was brief, involuntary, completely accidental. But Carla spun around like he'd done it on purpose. "What is your problem?" Her voice was low, but the passengers she'd been talking to heard it. A man 2 rows back heard it. Robert Grant, in 22A, looked up from the window. "I'm sorry," Zachary said, and his voice came out smaller than he wanted it to. "The plane moved. I can see that." She stepped closer to him. Too close. The kind of close that adults don't get to children unless they are trying to intimidate. "This is the second time you've been disruptive." "I wasn't—" He stopped. His mother's voice was in his head. "Be polite. Be calm. Don't escalate." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Get back to your seat." He went. He went as fast as he could without running, because running would have been another thing. He slid past the man on the aisle who had stood again without being asked, and he sat down, and he put his headphones on, and he turned the music up as loud as it would go. His hands were shaking slightly. He didn't know why. He hadn't done anything wrong. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. But his hands were shaking anyway, because that's what happens to your body when someone twice your size talks to you like you're less than nothing. The woman at the window had been watching. "You okay, sweetheart?" He nodded. She didn't look convinced. She looked at the aisle where Carla had gone, and her jaw was set in a way that said she was thinking about something. She went back to her book, but she wasn't reading. Zachary could tell because her eyes weren't moving. Robert Grant had been watching since the bathroom aisle confrontation. Something about the whole thing had set off an alarm in his chest that he knew well from years in the military. The alarm that goes off when you see a situation building towards something bad, and you don't yet know what the bad thing will be. He shifted in his seat. He watched the aisle. 20 minutes passed. Things were quiet. Zachary had let himself relax a little, let the music do its work again. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was over. It was not over. What happened next was this. Zachary dropped his headphones. That was it. That was the whole thing. He reached for them, and they slipped. The way things slip when you're a kid and your coordination is still catching up to the size of your hands, and they hit the floor with a plastic clatter that was about as loud as a stapler being knocked off a desk, barely audible over the ambient noise of the cabin. He ducked down to pick them up. Carla was 3 rows away. She turned at the sound. She looked at him crouching to pick up the headphones, and something in her face changed in a way that several people around her would later describe in almost identical words, like a door being opened that should have stayed closed. She walked toward him, not quickly, but with the kind of deliberate pace that means someone has made a decision. "I told you to sit still." Her voice was so low now that the people in the immediate rows had to lean in slightly to hear it. Zachary straightened up with his headphones in his hand. "I dropped them. I was just picking them up. You've been causing problems this entire flight." The man on the aisle side, the businessman, had his laptop open, but was no longer looking at it. His eyes were tracking this. The woman at the window had put her book face down on her tray table. "I haven't been," Zachary said, and to his credit, even though his voice was unsteady, he held her gaze. "I've been sitting here the whole time. I'm not trying to cause any problems." "Don't talk back to me." "I'm not talking back. I'm just telling you, you need to sit down and be quiet for the rest of this flight." "I am sitting down." He gestured to his seat, where he was, in fact, sitting. There was a logic to it that should have been irrefutable. He was 10 years old, and he was right, and they both knew it. That was what made what happened next so incomprehensible. She leaned in. She put one hand flat on his tray table, and she pulled her arm back with the other, and she punched him. Not slapped, not pushed. She punched him. A closed fist punch directly into his stomach, and the sound of it, soft and awful and wrong, cut through everything. Zachary made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a cry. He folded slightly, one hand going to his stomach, his eyes wide and confused in the way that children's eyes get when something has happened that doesn't fit inside the world they understand. The woman at the window was on her feet in the same second. "What is wrong with you?" The businessman stood up from his aisle seat. "Hey, hey!" And from row 22, Robert Grant was already moving. He moved the way men move who have been trained to move toward danger rather than away from it, which is not dramatically, not loudly, just steadily and with absolute clarity of purpose. He reached row 17 in 4 steps. He looked at Zachary, who was holding his stomach and blinking hard, and then he looked at Carla Stevens, who had straightened back up and was adjusting her uniform jacket like nothing had happened. "I need you to step back," Robert said. His voice was very quiet. That was the thing people would remember about his voice, how quiet it was. "Sir, I'm going to need you to return to your... I watched you punch this child." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I'm not going back to my seat. I need you to step away from him right now." The cabin had gone silent in the way cabins go silent when everyone collectively decides that the thing happening in front of them is more important than anything on their phones or their laptops or inside their own heads. Phones were already out. Not everyone's, but enough. The little lights of recording were on. Carla looked at Robert, then she looked at the phones. Something shifted in her expression. Not remorse, not guilt, but the particular alarm of a person who has just understood that they are being documented. "This is a private matter," she said. "It stopped being private the second you hit a child," the woman from the window seat said. She was standing in the aisle now, too, her silver reading glasses still pushed up on her head, her voice steady and cold and precise as a blade. "And I want your name. I want your name right now." Zachary had straightened up by then. His stomach hurt. He would tell his mother later that it felt like the time he'd gotten the wind knocked out of him playing football, that specific, hollow wrongness. But he was upright, and his eyes were dry. He would not cry in front of her. He had decided that with a kind of 10-year-old dignity that should not have been necessary and was heartbreaking to witness. "Are you okay?" Robert asked, turning to look at him directly. Not as a question to be polite, as a real question that required a real answer. Zachary met his eyes. "I'm okay." "You sure?" "Yes, sir." Robert nodded once, the way soldiers nod when they're acknowledging something without making it bigger than it needs to be right now. Then he turned back to Carla. "Who is the pilot on this flight?" "Sir, I need you to..." "I'm not asking you twice." He wasn't angry. He was something quieter than angry, and it was far more effective. "Who is the pilot on this flight?" A second flight attendant had appeared from the front of the plane, drawn by the noise that wasn't quite noise, but was somehow louder than noise. She took one look at the scene, at Robert standing steady in the aisle, at the woman still on her feet, at the phones, at Zachary holding his stomach, and her face went carefully blank in the way faces go when someone is doing rapid calculations. "What is happening here?" she asked, directing the question at no one in particular. "She hit that boy," someone said from a few rows back. Not shouted, just said, clearly and plainly, the way you state a fact. "She did," said the businessman, who had moved into the aisle and was holding his own phone up. "I saw it." "I have it on video," said a woman across the aisle, 2 rows back. "The whole thing." The second flight attendant looked at Carla. Carla's expression had closed down completely now, every emotion sealed behind it, which told the second flight attendant everything she needed to know. You don't seal your face off like that when you're innocent. You do it when you're calculating. "Carla," the second flight attendant's voice was very quiet. "I need to speak with you. I was handling a disruptive passenger. He's 10 years old," Robert said. He He's 10 years old, Robert said again, and something about the repetition. Patient, immovable, like a wall that keeps being there no matter how many times you push it, made Carla stop talking. The second flight attendant took her by the arm, gently but firmly, and moved her toward the front of the plane. She looked back over her shoulder at Robert. "Sir, I'm going to need your name and seat number." 22A, Robert Grant. He spelled his last name. He sat back down in his seat, but he didn't put his headphones in, and he didn't look out the window. He sat perfectly upright, and he watched the aisle. The woman from the window seat sat back down, too. She put her hand briefly on Zachary's arm. "You did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? Nothing." Zachary nodded. His hands had stopped shaking. But then, very quietly, so quietly that only she heard it, he said, "My mom is going to be scared." And that sentence, said without self-pity, said with the particular practical grief of a child trying to manage a thing that was not his to manage, was the thing that made her eyes fill with tears that she refused to let fall. "We'll make sure she knows you're safe," she said. "I promise." Up front, the second flight attendant had gone through the cockpit door. 30 seconds later, the captain's voice came on over the intercom. Calm, professional, the standard modulation of airline authority. But the words were not standard. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Davis. We are going to be making an unscheduled landing at the nearest available airport. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. We expect to be on the ground shortly. Thank you for your patience." The cabin erupted, not in panic, in noise, in the specific human noise of 200 people all turning to each other at the same time and saying variations of the same thing. "Did you see that? What happened? Is that kid okay? Did she really just? I have it on video. I got it all." Zachary sat in seat 17B with his rocket ship backpack under the seat in front of him and his headphones around his neck and his hands in his lap. He looked straight ahead. He breathed in and out. His stomach hurt. His mother didn't know what had happened yet. He thought about the playlist his dad had sent him. He thought about Stevie Wonder. He thought about how, in about 40 minutes, he was going to be on the ground and he was going to call his mother, and she was going to hear his voice, and she was going to know he was okay. He held on to that like a handhold on the side of a cliff. And outside the window, the ground was already rising up to meet them. The wheels hit the tarmac at 11:47 in the morning. Not at Charlotte Douglas, where the flight was supposed to land. At Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport in South Carolina, 112 miles short of the destination. The plane rolled to a stop at the end of a remote taxiway, away from the main terminal. And for a moment, the only sound inside the cabin was the engine winding down and the soft, collective exhale of 200 people who had been holding their breath for the last 22 minutes. Then, the phone started ringing. Not one or two, many. The cabin filled with the overlapping sounds of ringtones and vibrations, and people answered in hushed, urgent voices. And within 60 seconds, the words, "flight attendant," and "punched a kid," and "we just made an emergency landing" were traveling through phone lines and text chains and social media posts to people in living rooms and offices and cars across the country. The world didn't know yet, but it was starting to find out. Zachary White sat very still in seat 17B and watched the seat back in front of him. His stomach still hurt in that deep, dull way that doesn't go away quickly. He had his phone in his hand. He had typed his mother's name in the contacts 3 times and stopped himself 3 times because he didn't know what to say yet. He didn't have the words for it. He was 10 years old, and someone had hit him, and he didn't know how to explain it in a way that wouldn't make his mother's voice do the thing it did when she was trying not to cry in front of him. "You need to call her." The woman from the window seat, her name was Miriam, he'd learned, Miriam Chu, a retired schoolteacher from Decatur, was watching him with the specific patience of someone who had spent decades knowing what children needed before they could ask for it. "She needs to hear your voice, Zachary, not a text, your voice." He nodded slowly. He pressed call. It rang once. "Zach? Zach, baby, are you okay? I just got an alert that your flight was diverted. What is happening? Why are you—" "Mom." He kept his voice steady. He'd decided to keep it steady. "I'm okay. I'm on the ground. I'm safe." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds, which was how long it took Tanya White to shift from the first kind of fear to the second kind. The first kind was the one that screams. The second kind was the one that goes very quiet and asks questions in a measured voice because it has to. "What happened?" she said. He told her. All of it, from the cart bumping his head to the bathroom incident, to the headphones and the punch. He told it the way he'd tell it for the rest of his life, plainly, in order, without embellishment, because the plain truth was already enough. He didn't need to make it bigger. It was already big. When he finished, there was another silence. And then Tanya White said in a voice so controlled it could have cut glass, "She put her hands on my son. Mom, she put her closed fist into my child's stomach. Mom, I'm okay. I need you to put the nearest adult in charge on the phone right now." Not a request, a statement of intent. He looked around. The second flight attendant, the one who had pulled Carla away, was standing 2 rows forward, talking to an older man who appeared to be some kind of airport liaison because he was in a different uniform and had come onto the plane from the jetway in the last few minutes. Zachary raised his hand. The flight attendant looked at him. He held up the phone. She came over, looked at it, looked at him, and took it. What Tanya White said to that flight attendant in the next 4 minutes has never been fully recorded. But Miriam Chu, sitting 18 inches away, heard most of it, and she would later describe it this way. That woman did not scream. She didn't curse. She was precise. She was the most terrifying kind of calm I have ever heard in my life. She told that flight attendant exactly what she expected to happen in the next hour, and she made it very clear that if those things didn't happen, she would make it her full-time occupation to ensure that everyone involved understood the weight of what had been done to her child. The flight attendant handed the phone back to Zachary, looking like she'd been through something. "Your mother is going to be at this airport in 3 hours, she said. Zachary almost smiled. Yeah, she is. At 11:52, 5 minutes after the plane stopped, 3 police cruisers from the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Department pulled up alongside the aircraft. The officers boarded through the rear jetway. They spoke briefly with the second flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia, and then they made their way to the front galley area, where Carla Stevens was sitting in the jump seat with her arms crossed and her face arranged into an expression of absolute certainty that she had done nothing wrong. That expression lasted until she saw the officers. "Ma'am," the first officer said, "I need you to come with us." "This is completely unnecessary." Her voice was tight but controlled. The child was being disruptive, and I was managing the situation. "With your fist?" said a male passenger in row 15, loud enough that 6 rows in every direction heard it. A ripple of noise moved through the cabin. "Sir," the officer said to the passenger, not unkindly. Then back to Carla. "Ma'am, we can do this quietly or we cannot. Your choice." She stood. She straightened her jacket again. That gesture, people would note later, the jacket straightening, as if appearance were what mattered right now. She walked up the aisle between the 2 officers, and as she passed row 17, she did something that no one would be able to fully explain. She looked at Zachary, not with guilt, not with apology. She looked at him the way someone looks at a problem that has gotten out of hand, like he was still the source of the difficulty, like the officers on either side of her were his fault too. Zachary looked back at her. He didn't look away. Robert Grant, watching from 22A, felt something settle in his chest, because that boy's eyes in that moment, steady, clear, not flinching, were the eyes of someone who was already understanding something important about himself, something that would stay with him. Carla Stevens walked off that plane at 11:55 in the morning. The cabin applauded, not loudly, not triumphantly, the kind of applause that is relieved and exhausted and a little bit sad, because it's the kind that shouldn't have been necessary. The airport they were sitting at was small, as airports go. Greenville-Spartanburg handled mostly regional flights, a few major carriers, nothing like the volume of Atlanta or Charlotte. The terminal had 3 concourses and a food court and a gift shop that sold peach preserves and ceramic roosters. And on an average Tuesday morning, it moved about 4,000 passengers through its doors without incident. This was not an average Tuesday morning. Word had reached the terminal before the plane even fully stopped. That was the nature of 2024. The story existed on the internet before the participants had finished experiencing it. By the time Carla Stevens was escorted off the aircraft and into a waiting law enforcement vehicle, the clips were already circulating. Shaky phone video, shot from different angles in the cabin, showing the unmistakable arc of a uniformed adult's arm and the small figure of a boy folding under the impact. The clips were 30, 40 seconds long. They didn't need to be longer. The first one crossed 50,000 views at 12:03 p.m. By 12:15, the number was 200,000. By 12:30, it had cleared 1 million. Back on the plane, the passengers were being asked to remain in their seats while law enforcement took statements. This was not a quick process. It would take the better part of 2 hours to get through 200 people, and most of them had somewhere they were supposed to be, connections to catch, people waiting. And yet, in a way that felt almost intentional, almost communal, the cabin was quiet, patient. People sat with their phones and their thoughts, and the conversation that moved between seats was low and serious. The kind of conversation that happens when people recognize they have collectively witnessed something that matters. Robert Grant gave his statement first. He was thorough and methodical and precise, a function of years of writing field reports under pressure. And when he was done, the young deputy who'd taken his information looked at his notes and then looked at Robert and said, "Thank you, sir. This is going to be very useful." "Make sure it is," Robert said. Not as a threat, as a reminder. Miriam Chu gave her statement second. She was equally thorough. She had, without anyone asking her to, written down the sequence of events in the margins of her novel while they were waiting, because she was a retired teacher, and old habits of documentation died hard. She handed the deputy her handwritten notes and told him he was welcome to keep them. The deputy stared at them for a moment. "You wrote all this while we were on the ground?" "I wrote most of it while we were still in the air," she said. "I knew this was going to be important." Zachary's statement was taken by a female officer who introduced herself as Deputy Morris. She sat in the aisle next to his row, and she spoke to him at his level, not the way some adults speak to children, too loud, too bright, too careful, but the way you speak to someone whose account of events you are taking seriously. "Can you tell me, in your own words, exactly what happened?" she said. He told it again. Same way he'd told his mother, same order, same plain, simple accuracy. Deputy Morris wrote everything down without interrupting him, and when he was finished, she said, "You did really well. You're being very brave." He thought about that. "I don't feel very brave." "Most brave people don't," she said. "That's kind of the whole thing." He considered this with the seriousness of a child who is hearing something for the first time that he suspects he will carry for a long time. At 12:18 p.m., the airline's regional operations director, a man named Thomas Bleeker, boarded the plane. He was in his 50s, gray-suited, with the look of someone who had been pulled out of a meeting and briefed on the way over and was still catching up. He went directly to Zachary's row. "Son," he said, crouching down, "I want you to know that what happened today was completely unacceptable and does not represent—" "Are you from the airline?" Miriam Chu asked from the window seat. "Yes, ma'am, I'm the—" "Then you can talk to his mother." She looked at him over her reading glasses with the full authority of 30 years in a classroom. "She's on her way. You can wait." Bleeker straightened up. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He went back to the front of the plane. Miriam patted Zachary's arm without looking up from her novel, which she had reopened, though her eyes still weren't moving. "Some things are worth waiting for," she said, to no one in particular. Robert Grant had moved forward in the cabin by then, stationing himself in an empty seat closer to row 17, not because anyone had asked him to, but because the geometry of the situation made it obvious. Zachary wasn't alone, technically. There were officers on the plane, there were witnesses, there was Miriam. But Robert had daughters. He had a particular understanding of what it meant to be a child in a situation designed for adults, and he wasn't going to sit 11 rows back while that child sat in the center of it. "You like football?" Robert asked, settling into the seat across the aisle. Zachary looked at him, surprised by the question. Yeah? Who's your team? Falcons. Robert made a face. I'm sorry to hear that. Zachary laughed. It was small and quick, and it surprised him as much as it surprised everyone within earshot. But it was real. And in the particular emotional landscape of the last 2 hours, a real laugh from that boy felt like something close to a miracle. At 12:41 p.m., something happened that nobody on the plane had anticipated. The gate agent from inside the terminal came aboard and spoke quietly to the flight's senior officer, who had been coordinating with law enforcement at the front of the cabin. The gate agent was a young woman, early 20s, and she looked like she'd been running. Her voice was low, but not low enough. Sir, we have a situation in the terminal. What kind of situation? People are gathering. A lot of people. We started getting calls from the public about an hour ago, and now there are people just showing up outside the main entrance with signs. The officer looked at her. Signs. Printed signs, some of them handmade. They have his name on them. The boy's name. She paused. Zachary White. They have his name. The cabin heard every word. 200 people went completely silent. And then, from somewhere in the back, a woman started crying quietly. Not from sadness exactly, from the particular, overwhelming relief of discovering that the world is not, after all, as indifferent as it sometimes appears. Zachary heard his name. He heard it, and he went very still. How did they know my name? He asked Robert, in a voice barely above a whisper. Robert thought about the videos, about the way information moves now, faster than weather, faster than thought. Someone on this plane told the story, he said, and then somebody else told it, and then somebody else. And those people out there heard it and decided they weren't going to just sit at home. Zachary was quiet for a moment. They came for me? They came for you. He looked back down at his hands. When he looked up again, his jaw was set in a way that looked so much like his mother's jaw in a photograph Robert had never seen that it almost didn't make sense. The airline had been trying to keep what happened contained. That was the word Bleecker kept using in the hushed phone call he was conducting at the front of the cabin. Contained, as in manageable, as in something that could be addressed with a statement and a formal apology and a voucher, and would then, hopefully, shrink back to a size that fit inside a news cycle and disappeared. At 12:53 p.m., that possibility evaporated. The first national news van appeared outside the terminal at 12:53, then a second at 12:56. By 1 p.m., there were 4. The airport director, a man named Gerald Hayes, who had held the position for 11 years without a single major incident, walked into his own conference room at 1:02 p.m. to find it full of people who were all looking at him. His communications director, his security chief, a representative from the FAA who had materialized seemingly out of nowhere, 2 attorneys, and on a laptop screen propped up on the conference table, Thomas Bleeker's face, tense and gray. Gerald, Bleeker said, we need to manage the optics on this. Gerald Hayes looked at the laptop. He looked at the attorneys. He looked at the window through which he could see the gathering outside the terminal. Bigger now, at least 200 people, maybe more. Signs, some of them with a child's name on them in large block letters. With respect, Thomas, he said quietly, I don't think this is an optics situation anymore. He turned to his security chief. I want the terminal gates closed to new arrivals for the next hour while we sort this out. Not the building, just incoming boarding. I want it orderly, and I want that boy and whoever is with him moved somewhere comfortable and private the moment we can get them off that plane. The security chief nodded and left the room. That was how, at 1:07 p.m., the airport officially suspended boarding operations at all gates. 10 gates, 12 scheduled departures, hundreds of passengers, mid-journey, mid-plan, mid-life. All of it paused, because a flight attendant had made a decision 30,000 feet in the air that she had never, in any calculation she had ever run in her life, imagined would come to this. On the plane, the announcement came through the intercom system in the terminal, a calm, scripted statement about a temporary operational hold. And the passengers who had been waiting for news of their connecting flights looked at each other and at their phones and began making the calls that travelers make when their plans have been derailed. But even as they did, even the most impatient among them, the ones with the most urgent connections, did not complain loudly. Not today. Because everyone on that plane understood, without being told, that the delay was not the story. The delay was a consequence of the story. And the story was a 10-year-old boy in a green hoodie with a rocket ship backpack who had done nothing wrong and had been hit anyway, and who was currently sitting in seat 17B telling Robert Grant which Falcons receivers he thought were underrated this season while he waited for his mother to arrive. At 1:19 p.m., Tanya White was in a car doing 90 miles an hour on I-85 South. She had called her sister, who had called her brother, who had posted about it. She had called her pastor. She had called an attorney whose number she'd gotten from her best friend 20 minutes ago. She had done all of this while driving, which was inadvisable and which she did not care about even slightly. Her phone was on the seat beside her, showing her the videos for the first time. She watched the first one at a red light she'd caught near the 85 on-ramp. About 40 seconds. Phone video, slightly shaky, but clear enough. Clear enough to see everything. She set the phone face down on the seat. She gripped the steering wheel. She said, in a very quiet voice, a single sentence, to no one in the car but God and whatever air was listening. She put her hands on my baby. Then she pressed the accelerator and she drove. She had 71 miles to go. She would be there in less than an hour. And when she arrived, every single person in that building who had any authority over what happened next was going to understand with absolute clarity that Tanya White had not driven 90 miles an hour down an interstate to accept an apology. She had driven 90 miles an hour down an interstate to make sure that what happened to her son never happened to anybody else's child. And she was just getting started. Tanya White pulled into the Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport at 2:04 p.m. She had made the 71-mile drive in 43 minutes. She didn't remember most of it. She remembered the white lines of the highway moving under her, and she remembered the phone calls. Her attorney, Marcus Webb, telling her not to say anything to the airline without him present. Her sister asking if she needed someone to come. Her pastor saying he was praying. And she remembered keeping her voice level through all of it, which cost her more than any of them understood. Because the version of Tanya White that was driving that car and making those calls was not the whole of her. The whole of her was something else entirely, something that had been building since the moment she watched that video at the red light. And she was keeping it on a very short leash because she knew with the precision of a mother who had raised a black son in America and spent 10 years thinking about exactly these kinds of moments, that losing control right now would not help her child. She parked. She sat in the car for exactly 15 seconds. She breathed in. She breathed out. She picked up her phone and called Zachary. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, I can see the parking lot from where I'm sitting. Were you just in a silver car?" She almost laughed. Almost. "Stay where you are. I'm coming in." The terminal entrance was not what she had expected. She had expected to walk into an airport. Instead, she walked into a wall of people that took her breath away. There were at least 300 of them by now, maybe more, filling the space from the main doors all the way back to the ticketing counters. Some of them had signs, handmade ones, marker on poster board, the kind people make when they've decided to do something and don't have time to be neat about it. Zachary White, justice for Zachary. Hands off our children. One woman was holding a sign with just his name and a hand-drawn rocket ship. And that detail, that specific detail, hit Tanya in the chest like something physical. A woman she had never met in her life grabbed her arm as she pushed through. "Are you his mother? Are you Zachary's mom?" Tanya stopped. "Yes." The woman's face crumpled. "I have a grandson his age," she said. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened." She pressed Tanya's hand and let her go. Tanya moved through the crowd. People made way for her, not because they knew who she was on sight, but because something about how she moved told them. She walked like a woman with a destination and a purpose, and both of those things were absolute. At 2:09 p.m., she found Zachary in a small private waiting area just off the main concourse, the kind of room airports keep for difficult situations. He was sitting in a chair with his rocket ship backpack in his lap, talking to Robert Grant, who was across from him in another chair, with his long legs stretched out and his elbows on his knees, listening. An older woman Tanya didn't recognize was on Zachary's other side, reading a novel, or pretending to. Zachary looked up when the door opened. He stood up. He crossed the room in 3 steps, and then he was in her arms, and she was holding him so tight that he made a small sound of protest, and she loosened her grip exactly 1 degree, and he let her hold him the rest of the way. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just breathed him in. Green hoodie, familiar warmth. He was real, and he was solid, and he was here. "I'm okay, Mom," he said into her shoulder. "I know you are." Her voice was perfectly steady. "I know." She pulled back and looked at him. She put both hands on his face and turned it left, then right, then looked him straight in the eyes. "Does your stomach still hurt?" "A little. Not bad." She nodded once, checked his eyes again, then she kissed his forehead, straightened up, and turned to face the room. "I'm Tanya White," she said. "Which one of you is Robert Grant?" Robert raised his hand from across the room. He stood up. He was tall. She hadn't expected that, though she didn't know why she'd formed any expectation at all. She crossed the room and shook his hand. Hard. "Thank you," she said, "for my son." Robert looked at her steady. "Yes, ma'am. Any time." She turned to the woman with the novel. "And you are?" "Miriam Chu. I was in the window seat next to him the whole flight." Tanya reached out and took Miriam's hand in both of hers and held it for a moment without speaking. Miriam nodded, just once, and that was the whole conversation, and it said everything. At 2:14 p.m., the door to the private room opened again, and Marcus Webb walked in. He was 44, broad-shouldered, in a charcoal suit he'd put on in 8 minutes flat after Tanya's call, and he had the specific energy of an attorney who has seen injustice up close enough times to stop being surprised by it, but not enough times to stop being angry. He was carrying a legal pad and a recorder and a look that said he had already read the room from the doorway and formed 3 opinions. He spoke to Tanya first. "You talked to the airline yet?" "Not yet." "Good. Keep it that way until I'm in the room." He looked at Zachary. "You must be Zachary." "Yes, sir." Marcus Webb looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, the way adults do when they are assessing a child and trying to be honest with themselves about what they're seeing. What he saw was a 10-year-old boy sitting in a chair he shouldn't have been sitting in, holding a backpack he shouldn't have been holding, in an airport conference room he shouldn't have been in, because a grown woman in a uniform had decided to hit him. Marcus Webb had seen a lot in 17 years of civil rights law. He sat down across from the boy and said quietly, "I'm here to help your mother make sure this is handled right, okay?" Zachary nodded. "Okay. Do you trust me?" "I trust my mom." Marcus Webb almost smiled. "That'll do." At 2:22 p.m., Thomas Bleeker from the airline knocked on the door of the private room. He had 2 people with him, a woman introduced as the airline's director of customer relations, and a man in a suit who identified himself as the airline's legal counsel, which told Marcus Webb everything he needed to know about where this conversation was heading. "Ms. White," Bleeker began, "I want to start by saying that what happened today was absolutely Mr. Bleeker." Marcus Webb set his legal pad on his knee and his recorder on the table between them and pressed record with his thumb. "Before you say another word, I want to make sure we understand what's happening here. This is not a customer relations conversation. A child was assaulted on your aircraft by your employee. That is a criminal matter and a civil matter, and anything your company says in this room from this point forward will be noted and may be used accordingly. So I'd suggest you choose your next sentence very carefully." Bleeker looked at the recorder. He looked at his own attorney, who gave a very small, almost imperceptible nod. He took a breath. "We are aware of the seriousness of the situation." "Good. Then let's talk about what your company intends to do about it." In a separate part of the terminal, at roughly the same time, Carla Stevens was sitting in a small office used by the airport's security division, and she was not doing well. She had been in that room for 2 hours. She had been read her Miranda rights. She had been informed that she was being investigated for simple assault and potentially battery charges against a minor. She had been told by the deputy who had taken her off the plane that multiple videos of the incident were currently circulating on social media, with a combined view count that the deputy had described, with professional understatement, as significant. None of this was what was undoing her. What was undoing her was a phone call she'd received 40 minutes ago from the airline's human resources director, a call that had lasted 9 minutes and 40 seconds, and had concluded with the HR director saying, in a voice that had the particular flatness of someone reading from a script prepared by legal counsel, "Effective immediately, pending the outcome of this investigation, your employment with the airline is suspended without pay. You are to have no contact with any passengers, employees, or media regarding this incident. Do you understand?" She had said yes. She had hung up. And now she was sitting in that room, and the version of herself that had straightened her jacket and looked at a 10-year-old boy like he was a problem she'd created was getting harder and harder to locate. And the version of herself that was starting to understand the full weight of what she had done was becoming impossible to avoid. Her attorney, a man named Gary Finch, who handled mostly traffic violations and property disputes in the Spartanburg area and had clearly never anticipated a case quite like this one, was sitting beside her, doing his best. "Carla," he said for the third time, "I need you to tell me exactly what your account of events is." "I told you." "Tell me again." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "He was disruptive. He bumped me twice. He was causing a disturbance, and I was attempting to manage." "Carla." Gary Finch set his pen down. He was a practical man. He had been practical his entire life. "There are at least 7 videos from 7 different angles. The boy's account, his mother's attorney, 2 eyewitnesses who have already given formal statements, one of them a retired military officer with a spotless record. And the videos are very clear." He paused. "What I need to know is whether there is anything that happened on that flight that isn't in those videos." She was quiet. "Because right now," he continued, "the story that the world is seeing is that a flight attendant punched a black child in the stomach for dropping his headphones. And if that is the accurate story, if there is nothing else, then I need you to understand that the path forward is very narrow." She said nothing for a long time. Then, he was being disruptive. Gary Finch picked his pen back up and looked at his legal pad. He had written very little on it. "Okay," he said quietly. And what he meant by okay was that he now understood exactly how narrow the path was. At 2:47 p.m., Deputy Morris came back to the private room where Tanya and Zachary and Marcus Webb and Robert Grant and Miriam Chu were all still gathered. And she knocked and entered and said there was something they needed to know. "The DA's office has been in contact with us," she said. "Given the nature of the incident, the victim's age, the video evidence, the public nature, they are moving quickly. We expect formal charges to be filed against Ms. Stevens by end of business today." Marcus Webb nodded. "What charges?" "Battery of a minor. Potentially aggravated given the power dynamic. Uniformed airline employee, child traveling alone. The DA is looking at the full picture." "Good," Tanya said. One word. She hadn't spoken much since the meeting with Bleecker ended. She didn't need to. Miriam Chu had been listening from her chair. "What happens to her career?" she asked. "That's between her and the airline," Deputy Morris said. "But given the public nature and the documentation, I don't think anyone is expecting her to be flying again anytime soon." Zachary had been sitting quietly through most of this, his backpack now on the floor beside him, his phone in his hands. He was not on social media. His mother had strict rules about that, and he followed them. But he could feel the energy of the room shifting around him, the accumulation of consequences that had been set in motion by what happened in that cabin. And it was a lot to sit inside of. Robert Grant noticed. He leaned over. "How are you doing?" Real answer. Zachary thought about it. "I keep thinking about how nobody said anything at first. Like right when it happened. Everyone just froze." Robert was quiet for a moment. "That's normal. When something shocking happens, people freeze. It's biology. It doesn't mean they didn't care." "I know, but for those few seconds, it was just me and her." He looked at the floor, and she was smiling. Robert had not known about the smile. It hit him somewhere specific. She smiled. Right after, when she straightened her jacket, just for a second, Zachary looked up, like she thought nothing was going to happen to her. Robert thought about a lot of things in the silence that followed. He thought about all the times in his life when someone had looked at a situation and calculated, consciously or not, that the power dynamics were arranged in their favor. He thought about how often that calculation had been correct. He thought about how today it was not correct, and what that meant, and how important it was, and how insufficient it also was. She was wrong, he said finally. Yeah, Zachary picked at the edge of his backpack strap. She really was. At 3:12 p.m., 1 hour and 8 minutes after the airport suspended boarding operations, Gerald Hayes, the airport director, made a statement at a small podium that had been set up near the main information desk in the terminal, in front of approximately 400 people and 6 news cameras. He was a careful man by nature, Gerald Hayes, deliberate. He had been in airport management for 23 years, and he had learned that careful words prevented large problems, and that large problems were always more expensive than the careful words that might have prevented them. But he also had a daughter. She was 8, and somewhere in the preparation for this statement, those two things, the professional and the personal, had merged into something that made him set aside the script his communications director had given him and just speak. Today, a 10-year-old child was struck by a flight attendant aboard an aircraft that landed at this airport, he said. That child is safe. That child's mother is here. The individual responsible has been removed from the aircraft and is in law enforcement custody. Our facility suspended boarding operations this afternoon to ensure an orderly and safe response to this situation, and I stand by that decision. He paused. I also want to say this, not as an airport director, but as a person. What happened to that boy today was wrong. It was wrong clearly, completely, and without any qualification. And the number of people who came here today to stand with him tells me something I want to believe about this country. That most of us, still know the difference between right and wrong when we see it. Thank you. He stepped back from the podium. The room applauded. Not the polite airport applause of a gate agent making an announcement. Real applause, the kind that means something. Inside the private waiting room, someone had propped a phone up on the table, and they were all watching the live stream of the statement. Tanya watched it with her arm around Zachary's shoulders. When it ended, she didn't say anything, but she pulled Zachary slightly closer, and he let her. At 3:29 p.m., Marcus Webb came back into the room after a 40-minute separate meeting with the airline's legal team. He sat down across from Tanya. He had the look of a man who has information that has not yet been decided upon. They want to settle, he said. Tanya looked at him. Already? The video numbers are in the tens of millions now across all platforms. They have a PR disaster, a criminal case against their employee, and a press conference from the airport director that just got picked up by 3 national networks. He set his legal pad on the table. They want this contained. They are prepared to move very fast. How fast? They asked me what it would take. And what did you tell them? Marcus Webb leaned forward. I told them I hadn't talked to my client yet. He looked at her steadily. So, I'm talking to my client. Tanya looked at Zachary. He was watching her with his father's serious eyes. She turned back to Marcus. Tell me what they offered. He told her. It was a significant number, the kind of number that means something in practical terms. College fund, security, future. She looked at it and felt nothing except a low, steady certainty. That's not what I came here for, she said. I know, which is why I'm asking what you want. She was quiet for a moment. Miriam Chu, who was still in the room because no one had asked her to leave and she had not offered to, set her novel down. Robert Grant was watching Tanya with the particular attention of someone who already knows what she's going to say. I want her prosecuted, Tanya said. I want the charges to go through. I want the airline to change how they screen and train and monitor their employees, and I want that change documented and public, not internal. I want an independent review process for incidents involving unaccompanied minors. And I want whatever settlement they're offering to include a foundation, something with Zachary's name, something that does something real for kids who don't have an attorney in the room when things go wrong. She paused. Because that's the other part of this, Marcus. Most kids who this happens to, their mothers don't get a call from an attorney friend. They don't have Robert Grant in row 22. They don't have Miriam sitting in the window seat writing everything down. Her voice stayed level. Most kids this happens to just go home and carry it, and nobody knows. The room was completely silent. Marcus Webb was writing. He wrote for a moment and then stopped and looked up. That's going to be a much longer negotiation than they were hoping for. Good, Tanya said. Zachary was looking at his mother. He had the expression of a child seeing a parent fully, not as a parent, but as a person, for what feels like the first time. He had known his mother was strong. He had always known that. But this was different. This was watching someone take something terrible and refuse to let it be only terrible. Watching someone decide that the worst thing that happened today was also going to be the seed of something better. He thought about the woman outside with the sign, the one with the rocket ship on it. He thought about the applause on the plane. He thought about Robert asking him if he was okay, really asking, and Deputy Morris saying most brave people don't feel brave. He reached over and put his hand on his mother's arm. She looked at him. I want the foundation too, he said quietly. Can it help kids who fly alone? Like, so there's someone to call? Someone who's actually on their side? Tanya looked at her son. She pressed her lips together for just a second, the way she did when she was feeling something she wasn't ready to put into words. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it's going to do. Marcus Webb wrote it down. He underlined it twice. At 3:47 p.m., formal charges were filed against Carla Stevens in Spartanburg County, battery of a minor. The DA had moved in record time, which told everyone paying attention exactly how strong the evidence was. At 3:52 p.m., Zachary's father, Marcus White Sr., landed at Charlotte Douglas on a flight from Dallas. He'd booked it the moment Tanya called him and was already in a rental car driving south. At 3:58 p.m., a producer from a national morning news program called Marcus Webb's cell phone for the third time in 40 minutes. And at 4:01 p.m., Zachary White finally ate something. A bag of pretzels from a vending machine that Robert Grant had bought him because the boy had not eaten since breakfast, which Robert had noticed and which Zachary had not thought to mention. He ate them methodically, one at a time, and he was quiet for a while. And then he looked up at the room full of people who had rearranged their entire days for him, and he said, "My dad is going to be really mad when he gets here." Robert Grant looked at the ceiling. Miriam Chu smiled behind her novel. Marcus Webb kept writing. Tanya White put her arm around her son's shoulders and said, "He's going to be a lot of things, but the first one is going to be glad." Marcus White Sr. arrived at 5:23 p.m. He came through the terminal entrance moving fast, the way large men move when they are scared and refusing to show it, his eyes scanning the crowd before his body had fully cleared the door. He was 41 years old, 6'2", with arms that Zachary had inherited and a jaw that Zachary had also inherited. And he had been on a plane for 2 hours knowing that somewhere on the ground his son had been hit and not being able to do a single thing about it. That kind of helplessness does something specific to a father. It compresses everything, the fear, the fury, the love, into a single dense point that sits right behind the sternum and waits. He saw Tanya first. She was standing near the entrance to the private waiting area, and when she saw him, she tilted her head slightly toward the door behind her, which meant Zachary was inside and was okay. And Marcus Sr. exhaled for what felt like the first time since Dallas. Then he walked to her, and they stood close to each other for a moment. Not embracing, they had been divorced for 4 years and had worked hard to build the specific kind of respect that replaces what marriage leaves behind. And she looked up at him and said quietly, "He's strong. He held it together the whole time." Marcus Sr. pressed his lips together. "Like you." "Like himself," she said. "Go see him." He pushed the door open. Zachary was sitting at the small table with the remnants of a pretzel bag in front of him, and he looked up when the door opened, and for a half second, his composure, the carefully maintained 10-year-old dignity composure that had held since the punch, wobbled visibly. Just for that half second. His chin moved. His eyes went bright. Then Marcus Sr. crossed the room and pulled his son into a hug that was not careful about volume or decorum. and Zachary made a sound against his father's chest that was caught somewhere between a laugh and a cry, and was, in the end, neither one, just the sound of a child who has been holding himself together for 6 hours, finally setting some of it down. "I got you," Marcus Sr. said. His voice was rough. "I got you, man. I got you." Robert Grant, Miriam Chu, and Marcus Webb had quietly stepped back to the edges of the room, not leaving, just making space. Miriam had closed her novel permanently by this point. Robert was looking at the wall with the careful attention of a man who is giving a family a private moment while remaining present enough to matter. At 5:31 p.m., after Marcus Sr. had been introduced to everyone in the room and had shaken Robert's hand for a long time and had said to Miriam, "My son told me you sat with him the whole flight, ma'am. I will not forget that." The group reconvened around the small table because Marcus Webb had called everyone together with the specific energy of a man who has information that cannot wait. "I need everyone to hear this," he said, "because it affects decisions that have to be made tonight." He set his legal pad flat on the table. "The airline called me 20 minutes ago with a revised offer. It's substantially higher than the first number, but there's a condition attached that wasn't there before." Tanya looked at him. "What condition?" "They want a non-disclosure agreement. Full confidentiality clause, no public statements, no media appearances, no advocacy work connected to the incident." Marcus Webb paused. "In exchange, they are prepared to settle for a number that would be, by any practical measure, life-changing." The room was quiet. Marcus Sr. looked at Tanya. Tanya was looking at the table. Zachary was looking at his mother with the focused attention of a child who understands that something important is being decided and is old enough to want to understand it, but wise enough not to speak first. "They want us to be quiet," Tanya said. "That's the substance of it, yes. They want to pay us to disappear." Marcus Webb let the silence hold the answer. Marcus Sr. leaned back in his chair. His jaw was working the way it did when he was angry and being deliberate about containing it. "So while they're sending us a check, they keep their training protocols, they keep their hiring process, they keep their whole system exactly the way it is, and the next kid who flies alone has no idea this happened," Tanya finished. Another silence. Longer this time. Miriam Chu, who had been quiet through most of this, spoke from her corner of the room. "I want to say something, if that's permitted." Everyone looked at her. "I am a retired school teacher," she said. "I taught 4th grade for 31 years. In that time, I saw a lot of children hurt by systems that were designed by people who counted on those children having nobody watching, nobody documenting, nobody willing to say out loud and on the record what they had seen." She looked at Zachary. "Today, your son had all of those things. Most children don't. And the only reason those children might tomorrow is if today's story stays visible." She folded her hands. "That's all I wanted to say." Zachary was watching Miriam with an expression that was very old for his face. "What happens if we say no?" Marcus Sr. asked Marcus Webb. "We proceed with the civil case. It takes longer, it's harder, it's public. The airline will fight. Not as hard as they'd fight if the video didn't exist, but they will fight. And there will be a period where the focus is on you, on your family, on every detail they can find to complicate the narrative." He paused. "But the criminal case proceeds regardless of what you decide. Carla Stevens is already charged. That's not in your hands." Tanya looked at Zachary. "What do you think?" He looked surprised to be asked. Then he looked serious in the way he did when he was taking something seriously. "I think," he said slowly, "that if we take the money and go quiet, it's like she wins. Not her, the whole thing, the system, the part that counts on people being too tired or too scared to keep talking." He paused. "And I'm not tired, and I'm not scared. Not anymore." Tanya held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to Marcus Webb. "Tell them no." Marcus Webb was already writing. At 5:49 p.m., the decision not to sign the NDA became, in effect, a public one, because the airline's legal team had apparently been counting on a yes, and when the no came back, they were unprepared. And an unprepared legal team is a team that makes phone calls they shouldn't. And one of those calls was overheard by a gate agent, who told a colleague, who posted about it. And by 6:03 p.m., the story was not just that a child had been punched, but that the family had refused a major settlement and non-disclosure, which was a different kind of story, and in some ways, a more powerful one. The news vans outside the terminal, which had been at 4 and then 6 and were now 8, registered this immediately. Marcus Webb's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It's the morning show again. Not tonight, Tanya said. Tonight, we go somewhere quiet and Zachary eats a real meal. Tomorrow, we talk. Marcus Webb nodded and silenced the call. Then it rang again. Different number. He looked at it. His eyebrows moved slightly in a way that suggested the number was significant. "Who is it?" Marcus Sr. asked. "A senator's office," Marcus Webb said. The room went very still. "Which senator?" Tanya asked. He told them. It was not a minor name. It was the kind of name that appears on national news, that chairs committees, that has enough institutional weight that when that office calls, the nature of a situation officially changes. Marcus Sr. looked at Tanya. Tanya looked at Marcus Sr. Then they both looked at Zachary, who was looking at the phone with wide eyes and the specific expression of a child who is understanding, perhaps for the first time fully, that what happened to him today on that plane has become something larger than the two of them in row 17. "Tell them we'll call back tomorrow," Tanya said. Marcus Webb answered, conveyed the message professionally, and hung up. He set the phone down on the table. He looked at Tanya and he said, with the measured tone of an attorney who has handled important cases before, but is being honest about the scale of this one, "Tanya, I want you to understand something. As of right now, this story is national. By tomorrow morning, it will be the kind of national that shapes conversations in Congress. What you said in this room, the foundation, the oversight committee, the changes you want to see, that is now in play at a level I did not anticipate moving this fast." Tanya absorbed this. "Does that change what I said I wanted?" "No," he said. "It makes it more achievable." She looked at Zachary. He was looking back at her with those steady eyes, the serious eyes, his father's eyes, which were also, right now, entirely his own. "Okay," she said. "Then we sleep tonight, and we start tomorrow." They found a hotel 12 minutes from the airport, 2 rooms. Marcus Sr. took the room adjoining Zachary's because neither parent was prepared to be more than a wall away from their son tonight, divorce arrangements notwithstanding. Miriam Chu had exchanged phone numbers with Tanya and gone to find her own accommodations, having missed her original flight completely and rebooked for the following morning without a word of complaint about it. Robert Grant had a job interview rescheduled for 2 days out. The consulting firm had seen the news, had called him directly, and the firm's managing director had said, with considerable understatement, "Take the time you need. We'll be here." At 7:14 p.m., Zachary sat at a table in a diner 2 blocks from the hotel and ate a full plate of pancakes and bacon for dinner because he had decided that breakfast food was appropriate at any hour, and his parents had agreed with the specific, easy agreement of 2 people who are picking every battle carefully tonight, and this is not one of them. He ate most of it in silence, listening to his parents talk about logistics, the calls tomorrow, the attorney meetings, what the next week would look like. Their voices were low and efficient, the voices of 2 people who had been good at co-parenting precisely because they could do exactly this when it mattered: set down the personal history and operate as a team. At 7:38 p.m., Zachary looked up from the last of his pancakes and said, "Do you think she knows what she did? Like, actually knows?" Both parents looked at him. "Carla," he clarified, "do you think she went home tonight and thought about it and actually understood? Or does she still think I was the problem?" Marcus Sr. opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Tanya. Tanya set her coffee cup down. "I think," she said carefully, "that there are people who do things and never fully understand what they've done because understanding would require them to change how they see themselves. And changing how you see yourself is the hardest thing a person can do." Zachary thought about this. "So, maybe no? Maybe no." "That's sad," he said. Not dramatically, just as a plain statement of fact. It is, Tanya agreed. It's also not your problem, Marcus Sr. said. His voice was quiet and direct. What she understands or doesn't, that's hers to carry. What you carry is what you decided today, how you acted, how you held yourself. He looked at his son across the diner table. I heard about how you looked at her when they walked her off that plane. Robert told me. He said you didn't look away. Zachary looked down at his plate. I almost did. Almost is not the same as did. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening was doing what evenings do. Cars moving, people walking, the world continuing its business without awareness of or interest in the specific weight being carried inside this particular diner booth. That was fine. That was how it was supposed to be. The world didn't stop. You just had to find your footing inside it while it kept going. At 8:19 p.m., Carla Stevens was released on a personal recognizance bond from the Spartanburg County Detention Center. Her arraignment was set for the following Thursday. She walked out of the building with Gary Finch beside her, and they got into his car and drove without speaking for several minutes. My phone has been on since this morning, she finally said. I know. 412 messages. Gary Finch kept his eyes on the road. Don't read them. I read some of them. He didn't ask what they said. He knew what they said. The internet had been saying it loudly and in extensive detail since the videos hit 1 million views, which was now several million views ago. Carla, he said, I need you to understand what we're dealing with here. The DA is serious. The family has a serious attorney. The videos are not going away, and the senator's office being involved. What senator? She turned to look at him. He told her. He watched her face process it. He watched something in her expression, the last remaining structure of the certainty she'd carried all day, buckle and crack. I want to issue a statement, she said. Absolutely not. I want people to understand, Carla. His voice was firm in the way voices get when attorneys are done being patient. There is nothing you can say right now that will help you. Every word you say publicly becomes evidence. Every word. You want to talk to someone? Talk to me, in private. Everything else is silence. He paused. Do you understand? She looked out the window. People think I'm a monster. What people think right now is not the most important thing. It feels like the most important thing. He didn't answer that, because in the specific way she meant it, as a person who had spent her life being perceived a certain way, who had built her self-image on that perception, it probably was, and there was nothing useful he could say about it. Some reckonings were just reckonings. You sat inside them, and you waited, and you tried to figure out what came next. What Carla Stevens was beginning to understand, slowly and painfully, and alone in the passenger seat of her attorney's car, was that there was no version of next that looked like before. That chapter was closed. The only question was what she would do with the chapter that was left. She didn't have an answer yet. She looked out the window at the South Carolina night, and she didn't have an answer. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't certain enough about anything to pretend she did. At 9:47 p.m., Zachary White was in a hotel room bed that was slightly too soft, with his rocket ship backpack on the chair in the corner and the TV on low. His father was in the next room. He could hear the muffled sound of his dad's voice on a phone call, and his mother had kissed his forehead 40 minutes ago and told him to sleep, and he had said he would, and he was not sleeping. He was looking at the ceiling and thinking. He was thinking about the woman outside the terminal with the rocket ship on her sign. He was thinking about how she'd drawn it. He was wondering if she'd drawn it from memory or if she'd looked something up. He was wondering if she had kids. He was wondering if, when she'd heard his name on whatever news source had given it to her, she had felt what he felt when Robert told him why those people were there. That specific, overwhelming thing that isn't quite surprise and isn't quite gratitude, but is something in between, something that lands in the chest and stays. He was also thinking about what his mother had said at the table. The foundation. Kids who fly alone. Someone on their side. He pulled his phone out from under the pillow. His mother had given him 20 minutes of screen time before bed, which she had not enforced strictly tonight for obvious reasons. He opened the Notes app. He started typing, the way he typed when he had an idea that needed to be somewhere other than just in his head. He typed, Name for foundation. Something that says you're not alone. Something about flying. Something that kids would actually understand. He stared at it. He typed, safe flight. Guardian wings. Not alone at 30,000 feet. He stared at that last one. It was too long, but it was the right feeling. He kept typing. He was still typing at 10:23 p.m. when his father opened the adjoining door quietly to check on him, saw the light from the phone, and came to sit on the edge of the bed. He didn't tell Zachary to put the phone away. "What are you writing?" he asked. Zachary showed him the screen. Marcus Sr. read it. He read the list of foundation name ideas. He read the short paragraph Zachary had written about what the foundation should do. A hotline, he'd written, for kids flying alone. A real person to call, not an automated system. A real person who knows what to say and who to contact and who stays on the line until someone's there. Marcus Sr. read it twice. He handed the phone back. "How long have you been thinking about this?" he asked. "Since the room," Zachary said, "when Mom said it. But the specifics, the hotline, the real person." Zachary looked at the ceiling. "When I was on the plane after it happened, the thing that was hardest wasn't the pain. It was that I didn't know who to call. Like I had Mom's number, I had your number, but neither of you could actually do anything right then. And all the adults around me were trying, but they didn't know the rules either. Nobody knew exactly what they were supposed to do." He paused. "If there'd been a number, a specific number, just for me, someone who knew the airline rules and knew the rights and knew who to call, I would have felt less alone in those first few minutes." Marcus Sr. was quiet for a long time. "I'm going to tell you something," he said finally. His voice was low and serious, the voice he used when something mattered enough to be said exactly right. Most adults go their whole lives and never figure out how to turn a bad thing into something that helps other people. Some people try. Most people mean to. But the ones who actually do it, they start the way you started tonight, with a phone and a notes app and an idea that came from knowing exactly what hurt. He put his hand briefly on Zachary's shoulder. "You started tonight, Zachary. You understand that? Tonight." Zachary took that in. Set it somewhere inside himself where it wouldn't get lost. "Dad," he said. "Yeah. I'm glad you came." Marcus Sr. stood up. He pulled the blanket up around his son's shoulders in the unself-conscious way fathers do when they think the child is too old for it, and do it anyway, because some habits are older than opinions. "Go to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be a lot." "How much is a lot?" "More than today." Zachary considered this. Today had been significant. More than today was a large concept. He turned it over in his mind for a few seconds, and then he turned over in the bed, and he tucked his phone under his pillow with his notes still open, and within 8 minutes, he was asleep. In the next room, Marcus Sr. sat on the edge of his own bed and held his phone in his hands and stared at nothing for a while. Then he called Tanya. She answered immediately. "Is he asleep?" "Yeah, Tanya." He stopped. "I know," she said. He wrote a whole plan, in the Notes app, a hotline, for kids flying alone. The silence on the other end was the kind that is full rather than empty. "I know," she said again, softer this time. "Our kid is something else. He always was." He pressed his free hand against his eyes for a second. Just a second. "You okay?" "No," she said honestly, "but I will be. You?" "Same," he exhaled. "Same." They stayed on the line for a few more minutes without saying much. Sometimes that's what's needed. Not words, just the presence of another person who understands the full weight of a day without having to have it explained. They'd built that, the two of them, out of the ruins of something that didn't work. And tonight, Tanya White and Marcus White Sr. sat in separate hotel rooms, 12 feet apart, and held that thing carefully between them, because their son was sleeping with a phone under his pillow and a plan already forming, and tomorrow was going to be a lot. At 11:58 p.m., the story of Zachary White crossed 40 million combined views across all platforms. By midnight, it was 43 million. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., in an office that was still lit at that hour, because certain offices are always lit, An aide set a printed briefing document on a desk and said to the person behind the desk, "You need to see this one, Senator, tonight." The senator picked it up, read the first page, set it down. "Get the family's attorney on my calendar for tomorrow afternoon." "Yes, sir." "And get me the airline's CEO." The aide made a note. "Together or separate?" The senator looked at the document again, at the photograph of a 10-year-old boy in a green hoodie with a dark blue backpack, standing in a terminal waiting room, looking at a camera with eyes that were steady and clear and not flinching. "Separate," the senator said. "The family first." Zachary woke up at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of his father's voice through the wall. Not loud, but urgent, the specific register of an adult trying to keep their volume controlled while processing something that wants a bigger reaction. Zachary lay still for a moment, listening, and caught fragments. "How many?" and "this morning," and "already outside." And then he got up and put his feet on the floor and looked at his phone. 47 missed notifications. He didn't have social media. The notifications were texts from his aunt, from his grandmother, from 3 cousins, from a kid in his class named Devin who had somehow gotten his number and sent 6 consecutive messages in all capitals. He scrolled without reading and opened the Notes app instead, found his foundation ideas still there from last night, and read them in the quiet of the morning with the focused calm of someone returning to something important. His father knocked and opened the adjoining door at 6:52. He was already dressed. He had the look of a man who had not slept long, but had used the time efficiently. "You need to see something," he said. "Get dressed first." Zachary got dressed. What Marcus Sr. showed him when they sat together on the edge of the bed was not a single thing, but an accumulation of things. The story was on every major news network. Not a brief mention, a lead story, with reporters standing outside the Greenville-Spartanburg terminal even now at 7 in the morning, in the place where 400 people had stood with signs the day before. The headline variants were all slightly different, but all the same. 10-year-old boy, flight attendant, unaccompanied minor, assault charges. And below each headline, the numbers. 51 million views combined. Rising. But that wasn't the thing Marcus Sr. had specifically wanted him to see. He scrolled to a clip from a local Spartanburg news broadcast from 11 p.m. the night before. A reporter standing in front of the terminal. Behind her, still visible even at that hour, a small cluster of people who had not gone home. And in the middle of that cluster, holding a sign with a rocket ship drawn on it, was a girl who looked about Zachary's age. Maybe 9, maybe 10, standing next to a woman who was clearly her grandmother, both of them looking directly into the camera with the steady, deliberate expression of people who had decided that standing there was the right thing and were prepared to stand there as long as it took. Zachary stared at the screen. "She's my age." "About." "She came back. It's 11 o'clock at night, and she came back." "She did." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, what's her name?" Marcus Sr. didn't know. Nobody in the broadcast had named her. She was just a child in a crowd holding a handmade sign, refusing to go home. But her face was clear in the frame, and her eyes were the eyes of someone who understood, with a certainty that exceeded her years, that being present mattered. "I want to find her," Zachary said. Marcus Sr. looked at his son. "Why?" "Because I want her to know it worked, that it helped." He looked back at the screen, that it wasn't for nothing. At 7:31 a.m., Tanya knocked on the adjoining door and came in, already on her phone, already in motion, with Marcus Webb on the line and the energy of a woman who had processed the night while she slept and woken up ready. She kissed Zachary's forehead without breaking stride and held up one finger, 1 minute, and finished the call standing near the window. "The senator's office confirmed for 2 p.m., she said when she hung up. "Marcus, that's in person. Washington. They're sending transportation." Marcus Sr. stood up slowly. "Today?" "Today." He looked at Zachary. Zachary looked at his mother. His mother looked at both of them with the expression she used when the timeline was not negotiable and everyone needed to accept that and move forward. "What about school?" Zachary asked. Tanya blinked. Then she laughed, a real laugh, brief and warm, the first one that had come naturally since this entire thing started. Baby, your principal called me last night personally to say, take all the time you need. Mr. Patterson called you? He did. Zachary absorbed this. Mr. Patterson was not, in his experience, a man who called parents on weeknights voluntarily. The scale of what had happened pressed against him again, the way it kept doing. Just when he thought he had a handle on the size of it, it expanded. Okay, he said. Washington. At 8:15 a.m., they gathered in the hotel lobby. Tanya, Marcus Sr., Zachary, and Marcus Webb, and walked out to the car that the senator's office had arranged. And as they came through the main doors, they encountered the first camera crew of the morning. Not the large network setup, a local crew, 2 people, a reporter and a camera operator, who had clearly been waiting based on the speed with which the reporter stepped forward. Ms. White, can you tell us? My client will not be taking questions this morning, Marcus Webb said, not breaking stride. Zachary, how are you feeling? Zachary looked at the camera. He hadn't planned to say anything. But the reporter's second question had been directed at him, not at an adult speaking for him. And something about that direct address, the acknowledgement that he was the person this had happened to, and therefore the person whose voice mattered, made him stop. Zachary, his mother said quietly. He held up one hand, just briefly. He looked at the camera. He said, I'm okay, and I want every kid who sees this to know, if someone treats you wrong, even someone in a uniform, even someone in charge, you have the right to say so. You have the right to be treated with respect. That doesn't change based on how old you are. He paused. That's all I have right now. He walked to the car. The reporter stood with her microphone slightly lowered, caught off guard by the composure of the statement and the age of the person who had made it. The camera operator was still rolling. Marcus Webb got into the car last. He did not allow himself to smile until the door was closed. Then he allowed himself one brief, private smile and resumed his professional expression before anyone noticed. At 9:02 a.m., as the car moved toward the regional airport for the flight to Washington, Tanya's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. Ms. White? The voice was a woman's. Young, slightly nervous. My name is Dana Reeves. I'm a flight attendant with the same airline as Carla Stevens. I've been trying to figure out whether to make this call since last night. Tanya straightened. I'm listening. What happened to your son? It wasn't the first time. I mean, not a punch specifically, but the behavior, the targeting of certain passengers for small things. I've seen it. I've reported it internally twice in the past 18 months. Her voice tightened. Both times I was told it was a management matter and that the complaints were noted. Nothing happened. I have the emails. I kept copies. The car went very quiet. Marcus Webb had turned in his seat. His legal pad was already in his hand. Ms. Reeves, he said, leaning toward Tanya's phone, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm the family's attorney. I need you to not send those emails to anyone else yet. Not the media, not the airline. Do you understand? Yes. I'm going to give you my direct number, and I need you to call me in the next hour. Can you do that? Yes. I need to know that I'm protected. If I come forward, that is exactly what we're going to talk about, Marcus Webb said. Call me. 1 hour. Tanya ended the call. She looked at Marcus Webb. Marcus Sr. was looking at both of them from the other side of the back seat. She reported it before, Tanya said. 18 months ago. Twice, Marcus Webb said. He was writing fast. And it was buried. Which means the airline knew. Which means the airline knew. He underlined something on his legal pad twice, hard, the pen pressing through to the page below. Tanya, this changes the civil case significantly. This is no longer a single rogue employee. This is institutional negligence. This is documented, reported, ignored negligence. The weight of that settled over the car like a physical thing. Zachary was listening. He was always listening, this child, in the careful, complete way that children listen when they understand that what's being said matters, and they don't want to interrupt it, but they don't want to miss it either. They knew, he said quietly, not as a question, just placing the words somewhere outside his head where they could be looked at directly. It looks that way, his mother said. He looked out the window. The South Carolina morning was going about its business outside the glass. So when she hit me, It wasn't just her deciding to do it. It was everyone who knew what she was and looked away. No one in the car said anything, because there was nothing to add to that. It was precise and complete, and it had been spoken by a 10-year-old boy in the backseat of a car on a Wednesday morning, and every adult in that vehicle would carry those words for the rest of their lives. At 11:43 a.m., Dana Reeves called Marcus Webb. The call lasted 51 minutes. By the end of it, Marcus Webb had 4 pages of notes and the outline of a whistleblower protection filing and an entirely new architecture for the civil case that was going to make the airline's legal team's week significantly worse than it already was. At 1:15 p.m., the family arrived in Washington. The senator was a man in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the specific kind of energy that comes from decades of translating outrage into legislation. Not hot energy, but steady, compressed, the kind that builds rather than burns. He met them in a conference room, not his formal office, which Tanya's attorney noted and appreciated. It was a gesture, small but intentional, of treating this as a working conversation rather than a photo opportunity. He shook Marcus Webb's hand. He shook Marcus Sr.'s hand. He shook Tanya's hand and held it for a moment. Then he crouched down slightly to be at Zachary's level, which most people hadn't done, and he said, "I read everything last night. I want you to know I took it seriously." Zachary looked at him steadily. "Are you going to do something about it?" The senator held his gaze. "That depends partly on this conversation, which is why I wanted to have it." They sat. For the next 45 minutes, they talked. Really talked. The kind of conversation that moves fast because everyone in the room has done the reading and nobody needs the setup explained. The senator's aide took notes. Marcus Webb presented the outline of what they wanted: mandatory psychological screening protocols for airline employees with authority over unaccompanied minors, an independent oversight body with real enforcement power, required training standards for handling minors in distress, a clear reporting pathway that bypassed internal management for incidents involving children, and federal protection for employees who reported misconduct. The senator listened without interrupting, which Tanya noticed and respected. When Marcus Webb finished, the senator turned to Zachary directly. "You've heard all of that. Is there something not on that list that you think belongs there?" Zachary thought for exactly 4 seconds. "The hotline," he said, "for kids flying alone. A real person, not a recording. Someone who knows the rules and who stays on the line until help gets there." The senator looked at his aide. The aide made a note. "That's a good idea," the senator said. And he meant it in the way that people in rooms like this mean things, not as a compliment, but as an assessment of workability. "It was his idea," Tanya said. "He wrote it down in the hotel last night." The senator looked at Zachary again. There was something in the look, not sentimentality, something more practical than that said he was recalibrating his understanding of who was in the room with him. "How old are you?" he asked. 10. 10, the senator repeated. Not surprised exactly, just acknowledging it for the record. At 3:47 p.m., the meeting ended with a commitment that Marcus Webb called, in his careful attorney's language, substantive and actionable, which meant it was real. The senator's office would begin drafting language for what would be called, in its early internal version, the Unaccompanied Minor Safety Act. It would include all 5 points from Marcus Webb's list. It would include the hotline. As they stood to leave, the senator shook Zachary's hand. Actually shook it. Full handshake, adult to adult. "You held yourself with more dignity than most people twice your age would have," he said. "The country is going to know your name for a long time." Zachary looked at him. "I'd rather they know the law." The senator's aide, standing in the corner, looked up from her notepad. The senator himself went still for just a moment. Then, "We'll work on both." At 5:11 p.m., the twist that nobody had expected arrived in Marcus Webb's email. He read it in the back of the car, read it again, said, in the specific way that attorneys say, when something has happened that is significant and not yet classifiable, and then he turned to Tanya. "The airline CEO issued a personal statement 20 minutes ago." "What kind of statement?" He read it aloud. It was not a corporate non-apology, not the standard, we take these matters seriously language of institutional self-preservation. It was a full acknowledgement. The CEO stated that internal reports concerning Carla Stevens' conduct had been filed and had not been acted upon appropriately. He accepted personal responsibility for that failure. He announced the immediate suspension of the airline's current protocol for handling complaints against crew members. He announced that an independent external review would be commissioned, and he announced the creation of a fund, not a settlement fund, a structural one, dedicated to implementing the reforms that the White family had publicly described as their goal. He did not mention the non-disclosure offer. He did not have to. The gap between what they'd tried to do yesterday afternoon and what they were doing now was its own statement. He got ahead of Dana Reeves, Marcus Webb said. Someone told him we had the emails. He's cutting the loss before the whistleblower story breaks. Marcus Sr. looked out the window. So he's doing the right thing for the wrong reason. He's doing the right thing, Tanya said. The reason is his to deal with. At 6:28 p.m., Miriam Chu called Tanya from a gate at Greenville-Spartanburg Airport, where she was finally, a full day late, waiting for her rebooked flight home. I just saw the news about the CEO's statement, she said. I wanted to call. I'm glad you did, Tanya said. How is he? Tanya looked across the seat at Zachary, who was leaning against his father's shoulder, with his eyes half closed, his rocket ship backpack in his lap, the exhaustion of 2 days finally coming through in the soft heaviness of his posture. He's tired, she said. He's wonderful. He told a senator today that he'd rather people know the law than know his name. Miriam was quiet for a moment. I taught 4th grade for 31 years, she said. I had some remarkable children in that time. I want you to know that he is among them. She paused. The front row. That's where I would have put him. First day, no question. Tanya pressed her free hand briefly against her mouth, collected herself. Thank you, Miriam. Take care of him. Take care of yourself. And call me when the law passes. You'll be the first. At 7:55 p.m., Robert Grant arrived home. He pulled his gray truck into the driveway, sat in it for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and then went inside to where his wife was in the kitchen and his daughter was at the table doing homework. And his wife looked up, and without asking any of the questions she had been carrying all day, she simply came over and put her arms around him. He held on. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah, he breathed out. Yeah, I am. His daughter looked up from the table. She was 19, home for the week. She'd been following the story all day on her phone. Dad, she said, I saw the video. I saw what you did. He looked at her. I didn't do much. You stood up. He was quiet. Any decent person would have. His daughter shook her head slowly. No, Dad, they really wouldn't. That's the whole point. She looked at him with the particular clarity of a young woman who has studied enough history to understand the distance between what people should do and what they actually do. You stood up. That matters. Robert looked at his daughter for a long moment. He thought about Zachary in seat 17B with his headphones and his rocket ship backpack and his 10-year-old dignity. He thought about the moment he'd gotten up from 22A and walked forward. How it had not felt like a decision so much as an inevitability, the way some things feel inevitable once the moment arrives, even if you couldn't have predicted them. He was something else, that kid, he said. You should have seen his eyes. At 9:33 p.m., from a hotel room in Washington, D.C., Zachary White posted for the first time in his life on a social media account that Tanya had created with him and Marcus Sr. Together after dinner, the three of them reading the terms of service and talking about rules, which was the most normal thing they had done in 2 days, and felt, because of that, deeply good. The account was verified immediately, the platform had been watching, and the first post was a photograph. Not of the airport, not of Washington. It was a photograph Miriam had taken on her phone inside the private waiting room at Greenville-Spartanburg, before anyone had really registered she was taking it, at the moment when Marcus Sr. had first walked in and Zachary had stood up from his chair. It caught Zachary from the side, green hoodie, rocket ship backpack on the chair behind him, his face turned toward the door, his expression caught in the precise half-second between composure and relief. Under the photograph, Zachary had written in the plain, direct voice of a child who had learned in 48 hours that plain, direct language was more powerful than any other kind. I didn't ask for any of this, but since it happened, I wanted to mean something. We're building a foundation for kids who travel alone and need someone on their side. We're working on a law, and for anyone who helped, on the plane, outside the terminal, at home watching, thank you. You showed me that most people, when it really matters, will stand up. Don't forget that. I won't. He read it back once. He looked at his mother. She nodded. He pressed post. Within 4 minutes, it had been shared 12,000 times. Within 20 minutes, 60,000. By midnight, the number was beyond counting in any practical sense because it had broken into the category of things that move faster than measurement. At 10:01 p.m. in a small apartment in Spartanburg, the girl from the news clip, the one with the handmade rocket ship sign, 9 years old, whose name was Aaliyah, was told by her grandmother to put her tablet away and go to sleep, but not before her grandmother let her read the post one time. Aaliyah read it. She looked at her grandmother. "He saw it," she said. "He saw us standing there." Her grandmother smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "He saw." Aaliyah lay down. She pulled her blanket up. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I want to work on the foundation. When I'm older, I want to be the person who answers the phone." Her grandmother, a woman who had lived long enough to know that children mean what they say when they say it like that, leaned down and kissed her forehead and said, "Then you will be." At 11:47 p.m., in a courtroom 3 weeks later, Carla Stevens stood before a judge and entered a plea. The room was quiet. Gary Finch was beside her. The DA was at the other table. In the gallery, Tanya and Marcus Webb sat together, and 3 rows behind them, Robert Grant sat with his hands folded in his lap. She had done something in the days between that no one had expected. She had asked, through her attorney, to write a letter directly to Zachary. Gary Finch had strongly advised against it on legal grounds. She had written it anyway. Marcus Webb had read it before it reached Tanya. He'd brought it to Tanya and said, "It's real. I've seen a lot of these. This one is real." Tanya had brought it to Zachary. He had read it twice, alone, in his room. He had not said much about it afterward, but he had done something. He had written back. A single paragraph, 6 sentences, in his own handwriting on wide-ruled notebook paper. He had given it to Marcus Webb, who had given it to Gary Finch, who had given it to Carla, who had read it standing in her kitchen and had not been able to read it all the way through on the first attempt. What the letter said was private. It remained private. What was known was that Zachary had written it, that he had chosen to write it, that no one had asked him to, and that he was 10 years old. The Unaccompanied Minor Safety Act was introduced in the Senate 14 weeks after the incident. It passed committee in 22 days, which was faster than any comparable legislation in recent memory, which was the kind of thing that happens when a story has been seen by enough people and felt by enough people and carried by enough people, that the people whose job it is to make laws can no longer afford to move slowly. On the day the act was signed into law, Zachary White was standing in a room in Washington, D.C., in a suit his father had bought him, and a tie his mother had tied, and his rocket ship backpack on the chair behind him, because he had brought it, because it was his, and he wasn't leaving it anywhere. The senator found him after the signing ceremony. They shook hands for the second time. "How does it feel?" the senator asked. Zachary looked around the room. He looked at his mother, who was talking to Marcus Webb with the contained brightness of someone who is very happy and being professional about it. He looked at his father, who was taking a photograph with his phone, with the unselfconscious enthusiasm of a parent who is not even slightly embarrassed about it. He looked at Robert Grant, who had been invited and had come in his best clothes with his wife and his daughter beside him, all 3 of them looking at Zachary with the particular, quiet pride of people who were there at the beginning. He thought about Miriam, who was watching on a live stream from Decatur with a glass of something warm in her hand and tears she was not bothering to wipe because she was alone and there was no reason to. He thought about Aaliyah, who was in school today, and whose teacher had let the class watch the signing, and who had raised her hand when it was over and told the class about standing outside the terminal with her sign, and whose teacher had said that is exactly the kind of citizenship this country needs more of, and who had written that down in her notebook and underlined it. He thought about every kid, named and unnamed, who would fly alone after today and have a number to call and a real person to answer, and a law that said in formal federal language that their safety and their dignity were not optional and were not at the discretion of whoever happened to be having a bad day in a uniform. He looked back at the senator. "It feels like the beginning," he said. And he was right. Because Zachary White did not stop at 11 years old, or 15, or 22 when he graduated college with a degree in public policy and a minor in communications, and gave a commencement speech that was carried by 4 national networks. He did not stop at 26 when the foundation that bore a name he had eventually settled on, not alone, had answered its 100,000th call from a child in distress in an airport somewhere in this country. He did not stop. And the boy who had sat in seat 17B with his headphones and his rocket ship backpack and his 10-year-old dignity, the boy who had been punched and had not looked away and had held himself together and had written a plan in a notes app in a hotel room at 10 o'clock at night, that boy became the kind of man who changes things. Not because something terrible happened to him, but because he refused from the very first moment to let the terrible thing be the end of the story. Some people are broken by what finds them. And some people, the ones who look at what found them and decide, quietly and without performance, that it is going to mean something, those people become something else entirely. Something that lasts longer than the incident that started it. Something that reaches further than the airport where it began. Zachary White was 10 years old when a woman in a uniform decided he was nothing. He spent the rest of his life proving, in ways large and precise and undeniable, that she had been more wrong about anything in her entire life.